Many mythologies, cultures, religions, and traditions across the world have the idea of a space that exists under the living, with some even incorporating the concept of the soul of the deceased making its own journey into the underworld. Yggdrasil from Old Norse mythology is an immense and central sacred tree that connects the heavens, the world, and the underworld. The legs of Vishnu as the cosmic man depict Earth and the seven realms of Patala, the Hindu underworld. One common feature of underworlds have stories of living people making journeys to the underworld, which is often done for some heroic objective. Other myths reinforce traditions that entrance of souls to the underworld requires a proper observation of ceremony, such as the ancient Greek story of the recently dead Patroclus haunting Achilles until his body could be properly buried for this purpose. A number of mythologies incorporate the concept of the soul of the deceased making its own journey to the underworld, with the dead needing to be taken across a defining obstacle, such as a lake or a river, to reach this destination. Many interpretations of this kind of afterlife stand in stark contrast to the concept of hell, an afterlife location often placed in another dimension directly beneath Earth's surface, in which evil souls are subjected to punitive suffering filled with demons and souls of the dead, which often incorporates torture as an eternal punishment after death, with agonizing fates almost comparable to the horrors of American public schools. Other religions, which do not conceive of the afterlife as a place of punishment or reward, merely describe an abode of the dead, the grave, a neutral place that is located under the surface of the earth. Punishment in hell typically corresponds to sins committed during life. Sometimes these distinctions are specific, with damned souls suffering for each sin committed. See for example Plato's Myth of or Dante's Divine Comedy. But sometimes they are general, with condemned sinners regulated to one or more chamber of hell, or to a level of suffering. Despite these common depictions of hell as a place of fire, some other traditions portray hell as cold. Buddhist, and particularly Tibetan Buddhist, descriptions of hell feature an equal number of hot and cold hells. Among Christian descriptions, Dante's Inferno portrays the innermost ninth circle of hell as a frozen lake of blood and guilt, essentially a space where people who've committed the most damnable sin go to experience the most damnable punishments. The video game Minecraft parallels this multicultural concept of worlds on their own levels above or below one another, and a concept of hell that echoes the worlds of Dante's Inferno, having the overworld the player spawns in, the end originally intended to be the game's upper world, and the nether, the closest thing to an underworld vanilla Minecraft has to offer. To access the nether, the player must construct a nether portal in the overworld, but portals created in the end do not activate. To create the portal, the player must first build a rectangular obsidian frame, ranging in size from a minimum of 4x5 to a maximum of 23x23. Once the frame is built, it can be activated by placing fire within the frame, using flint and steel, fire charge, dispensers, or any materials. The portal allows most entities, with the exception of the Wither, the Ender Dragon, and entities riding or being ridden by another entity, to be transported to a corresponding portal in the nether. In survival, the player must stand in a nether portal for 4 seconds to get to the nether. The player can step out of a portal before it completes its animation to abort the teleport. The portal generates a sound effect while the player is inside it. If there is no corresponding portal, a new 4x5 portal is created. The portal can be destroyed by breaking the obsidian frame, by a nearby explosion, or by placing water in the overworld, or lava into it with a bucket or dispenser. Any of the blocks in the corners can be destroyed without destroying the portal. It features a unique cave-esque terrain with no sky, with lava and fire being common hazards everywhere in the nether, and areas distant from the player are shrouded in fog. Unlike the overworld, the shape of the terrain in the nether is independent of the biome distribution. Instead, the biome alters the surface material and adds terrain features to the netherrack terrain. It's divided into several biomes, just like the overworld, with each of the 5 having its own unique set of terrain, mobs, structures, ambiance, resources, etc. The nether wastes were the only biome before the nether update, and the most common biome currently. The surface is composed of uncovered netherrack exposing more mineral veins than any other biome. Zombified piglins dominate this biome and can be found in hordes of up to 4. The Soul Sand Valley is a dangerous desert-like biome, not just because of the huge caverns and darkness that can allow numbers of ghasts and skeletons to spawn, but also due to the deposits of soul sand which slow the player down. Boots enchanted with soul speed, however, allow the player to avoid the slowing effect of soul sand. Bluish colored soul fire is common here, and are more dangerous than regular fires. Because of the huge amount of fossils here, the Soul Sand Valley might once have been a habitable paradise, full of huge, bygone creatures. It's unknown why they went extinct, but most likely a drought, which explains why the biome is dry, or a volcanic eruption from the basalt deltas were the culprits. The only vegetation surviving today are crimson roots and mushrooms, whilst the only mobs left are skeletons, ghasts, and endermen, as well as striders that spawn over the lava ocean. Pretty far from an ocean, the crimson forests are named for their red color since they're covered by huge fungi. Huge pig-like animals called hoglins roam around the Nilium-covered terrain, whilst tribes of piglins hunt them for food. This makes it one of the only biomes to have an ecosystem. While not as numerous as in the other nether wastes, the occasional zombified piglin also roams, and if near normal piglins, it will scare them away. It's also one of the more habitable biomes in the nether due to hoglins being a source of food in the dimension, and despite being a hostile mob, it can be bred, making it perfect for farms in the dimension. The warped forest type biome has the most amount of flora in the nether dimension due to the additional nether sprouts that are only found within the biome, but also it has 2 mobs, those being the enderman and the occasional strider. The amount of endermen here makes it an ideal place to collect ender pearls before the player has access to the end dimension. The very low diversity of mobs here makes it another habitable place in the nether, since no mobs spawned here are naturally hostile to the player. Not so habitable is lava and magma cube saturated basalt deltas, which are one of the most dangerous biomes in the game. The terrain consists of steep and spiky basalt formations along with the flatter deltas. When the biome collides with the lava sea, archipelagos of basalts and gravel form. The biome is almost impossible to build in, which might explain why bastion remnants don't generate here, unless the bastion remnant generates in a bordering biome. Even though the magma cubes here are dangerous, their spawning rate makes the biome ideal for collecting magma cream, which can be used for brewing fire resistance potions. Blackstone also generates more commonly here than in other nether biomes, making the basalt deltas ideal for making stone tools. I can bet every view on my channel right now, which, come to think of it, isn't much, that you're probably wondering to yourself, what does any of this have to do with mythological and creative interpretations of underworlds and hell? Each and every biome has at least some in common with one of the circles of hell from Dante's Inferno, the first book of the Divine Comedy, and the concept of having worlds stacked on top of one another in the same dimension, making up the whole that is Minecraft, harkens back to the idea of religions, cultures, mythologies, and fables, particularly Yggdrasil, as the tree connected the heavens, the world, and the underworld. The first biome in question, the Nether Wastes, are one would typically think of when the concept of a fiery land of anguish and agony comes to mind. It's most comparable to the sixth circle of hell in Inferno, particularly the city of Dis. In it, he states, quote, "We moved toward the city, secure in our holy cause, and beheld such a fortress. And on every hand I saw a great plain of woe and cruel torment. Bitter tombs were scattered with flame, made to glow all over, hotter than iron need be for any craft. And such dire laments issued forth as come only from those who are truly wretched, suffering and forever lost." End quote. It's clear that the nether fortresses in the Nether Wastes surround certain parts of a chunk that may be a Nether Waste biome, could be compared directly to the city of Dis described in the poem, which mostly consists of sinners burning in really hot open graves of fire. Yeah, this story is really weird. The Soul Sand Valley is what I would bring closest to the inner part of the seventh circle of hell, reserved for blasphemers and litterers. It's a giant desert where it continually rains fire just outside of the forest, where people commit violence against themselves reside. Definitely the more far out there hypothesis, but I do think some inspiration may have been taken. The Crimson Forest and Warped Forest are the closest biomes I could get to the aforementioned middle 7th circle of hell, the latter of which I'd like to point out reminds me of the Black Retold from Skyrim. Since the forest in 7th circle does have wilting trees, every location in question technically does have an ecosystem. The inner part of the 8th circle in Inferno is a boiling lake of tar, exclusively reserved for politicians, which totally by coincidence happened to be a lot of the ones Dante didn't like. Political implications in works of fiction aside, the basalt deltas are what come to my mind when I think of that part of Dante's hell, and with plenty of reason. They're filled to the brim with basalts and gravel, riddled with black stone, and there's lava all over the place, making the entirety of every one of these biomes perhaps composed of volcanic rock. Not only this, but the overworld is an incredibly complex environment with a wide variety of features. It's divided into various biome types which determine the basic characteristics of the terrain within it, and almost all of them have several variations that alter these characteristics to create more realistic terrain. The biome type also influences the biome size, determines which mobs can spawn within it, and affects how environmental behaviors, such as weather, are expressed within it. The overworld is composed of a large number of terrain patterns called generated structures, whose arrangement varies widely from one seed to another. The overworld in Minecraft has been deliberately put into the game's dimension and in between the Nether and End to parallel Yggdrasil's idea of types of worlds being stacked on top of one another. Minecraft's End world, originally intended to be its heaven, is mostly a platform of sponge-like rock with protruding obsidian towers from the top. There is a gap between the central island and the outer islands of about 1,000 blocks, with nothing but the void. The starless sky and the void of the End are both composed of a blank, static pattern. The daylight cycle is absent in the End, similar to the Nether, being replaced by a dim, constant light with most items and blocks functioning in the End exactly as they do in the overworld, with few notable exceptions. Beds and respawn anchors cause an explosion 25% stronger than TNT, and cause fires when one attempts to use them, as beds do in the Nether and respawn anchors do in the overworld. Villagers somehow, if brought in, can still use beds safely. Compasses are unable to find the original spawn point except aiming for lodestone, as spawn points cannot be set within the End. Clocks are unable to determine the position of the sun and the moon, as there is no daylight cycle in the End. Clocks instead spin randomly as they do in the Nether. Nether portals cannot be activated by the player in the End, although they can be placed through commands or external programs and editors. Fire burns indefinitely on bedrock but doesn't naturally spread onto other blocks of bedrock as with the netherrack. As anyone who's been to the End knows, it's anything but heaven, being the incarnation of a far cry from what it was originally intended as. The Aether can be considered Minecraft's version of heaven, but it's just a mod, and as of me writing this, it's not canon content. I know this only scratches the surface of the dimensional lore Minecraft has to offer, but once one knows its mythological parallels, it's hard to look at them the same again. Minecraft's group of different dimensions put into one game parallel the concepts of mythology and creative work done over the course of millennia to enhance and to delve deeper into human understanding of the space around us. Throughout the course of history, modifications, retellings, minor alterations, and any change you could think of have been made to many stories and ideas of legends people tell to one another. Dante's Inferno details the experience of its own author taking his journey through various parts of the circles of hell, each with their very unique environments, conceived for the sole purpose of punishing the sinners that reside there. I truly do believe Minecraft draws a hefty amount of inspiration from this poem's ideas, especially for the Nether's new biomes. Reaching beyond the Nether and into Minecraft's meta as a whole, its concept of a stacked worlds paralleled Yggdrasil's structure of the 9 worlds, being stacked on top of one another and divided as worlds of the dead, worlds of the living, and worlds of the heavens. Clearly, there's plenty more mythological lore that Mojang could have taken from, or have taken little from already established stories and conceived their dimensions themselves. However the worlds of Minecraft came into existence, their mythological analogues are hard to deny.